Have you ever wondered why the earliest stories told by humanity do not describe the beginning of civilization, but the end of something that came before it? As if the world we know is only the second chapter of a book whose first pages were torn out. Ancient myths across continents describe a time before memory, a sky with different colours, and oceans that swallowed an entire age. It is strange how often these stories match. Too strange, some would say, for coincidence. Archaeologists call them shared archetypes. Historians call them cultural parallels. Conspiracy theorists say they are evidence of a civilization erased from existence. And scientists, in their diplomatic way, prefer not to comment at all. Yet the consistency is difficult to ignore. Cultures separated by oceans all describe a world that ended violently, suddenly, and completely. And they all insist something survived. A voice, or as some texts claim, a teaching. It appears in carvings older than any known kingdom, in manuscripts whose authors left no names, in symbols that show up in places where they absolutely should not. But among all these fragments, one artifact stands above the rest. A tablet carved from a green stone no natural source can account for. A tablet said to contain the underlying structure of reality. A tablet so mysterious that even describing it creates arguments among scholars, mystics, skeptics, and everyone online who suddenly becomes an expert on everything. The Emerald Tablet. Before we move any deeper, take a moment to tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. And as always, the images in this video are here simply to help frame the story, not to define it. Thank you for being here and for supporting these journeys into forgotten history. Depending on who you ask, it is a metaphor, a spiritual device, a manual for transmutation, a myth invented by dreamers, a cipher left by aliens, a prank played by medieval scholars, or the kind of thing that gets entire Reddit threads locked by moderators. Each explanation fails for the same reason. Versions of the tablet's text appear in Egypt, Greece, Arabia, and medieval Europe, long before trade routes or shared languages existed. This does not happen by accident. Something is connecting them. Some researchers believe the tablet was passed secretly from culture to culture. Others believe multiple civilizations rediscovered the same principles independently. And a smaller group suggests the tablet is a relic from a civilization that predates all known history. A civilization described as radiant, structured, and impossibly advanced, whose existence would require rewriting every timeline we rely on. According to these stories, that civilization ended abruptly in a global collapse, an event consistent with geological records of sudden flooding and climate shifts nearly 12,000 years ago. But before it fell, one teacher carried a fragment of its knowledge into the next world. His name appears in different languages, but the role is always the same: the keeper of cycles, the recorder of worlds, a being who walked through death as if it were a hallway. Thoth. This is not where his story begins. It is simply where he intersects with ours. Long before Egypt, long before writing, long before humanity believed itself alone in understanding the cosmos, older traditions spoke of beings who measured time not in decades, but in cycles lasting thousands of years. They believed consciousness was far older than the human body, and that civilizations were temporary vessels for something deeper. When a cycle ended, a chosen few were said to carry the memory of the world into the next age. They carried no books. They carried patterns, blueprints encoded in a science that would later be misinterpreted as magic. These patterns, according to legend, were etched into a green tablet polished to reflect a light not of the sun. And yet, even the earliest texts cannot agree on the most basic detail: how many tablets existed. Some say 1, some say 7, some claim 10. A few insist the tablet could divide itself, exist in multiple places simultaneously, and still remain one. It is an idea that sounds absurd now, but the ancient writers had no trouble with it. To them, this behavior was normal. If their accounts are accurate, then humanity has been searching for the wrong thing. The emerald tablet may never have been a single object. It may have been a pattern, a principle, or a technology capable of reproducing itself across ages. The oldest myths do not say the tablet was found. They say it was delivered to specific moments when humanity approached a threshold, delivered to cultures on the edge of awakening, delivered not to kings or priests, but to time itself. It appears when knowledge must be preserved and disappears when the world is not ready. And this pattern repeats across ages. Its message also repeats, as above, so below, as within, so without. A phrase treated as mystical poetry by some, but increasingly interpreted as an early statement of a scientific principle, that the laws governing the cosmos are reflected in the smallest structures of matter, and perhaps even in the human mind. In this sense, the Emerald Tablet may not be a supernatural artifact at all, but humanity's oldest scientific document, or the oldest warning. If these stories come from a world before recorded history, then the Emerald Tablet is not the beginning of a mystery. It is the last surviving whisper of a civilization erased by the planet itself. A whisper carried by a being who walked out of a drowned world and into the earliest chapters of human history. And here is the twist most people overlook. The tablet does not survive because it is ancient. It survives because every age seems to rediscover it, as if the memory of that world is embedded in us, waiting for the right moment to surface. The moment when one name reappears. Because the story that shaped our world does not begin with humanity. It begins with Thoth, and with the fall of a world we were never meant to remember. Long before the world took the shape we know, long before the continents settled into their present silence, there was said to be a land that shone brighter than any age that followed. The legends do not call it a country or an empire. They call it a memory. A memory too vast to fit inside the history we teach, yet too detailed to ignore. The name given to it is Atlantis, but that word is only a shadow of what the ancient texts describe. Atlantis was never a single city. It was a constellation of 10 kingdoms arranged like a great circle around a central island of knowledge. The people of these kingdoms were not uniform. Some were said to tower above ordinary humans. Others glowed faintly in the dark. Others carried markings on their skin that were described as moving when touched by light. These details do not fit with anything in recorded history, but they appear in sources separated by oceans and millennia. Each kingdom had a purpose. One studied the movement of stars. Another studied the deep currents of the ocean. Another shaped metals unknown today. Another guarded the archives of stories from earlier cycles of Earth. But the most mysterious of all was the kingdom at the center, where the teachers lived. It was called Ka-Ora, a name that in some forgotten languages means the place where knowledge breathes. Here, knowledge was not learned as humans learn it now. It was absorbed. It was said that the teachers of Ka-Ora understood the architecture of reality. They could explain why the sky looked one way in one age and different in another. They knew that civilizations rose not by accident but by rhythm. They believed the world itself had a pulse, a great cycle that ended and began again in fire, ice, or water. But the most striking part of the legends is not the power of Atlantis. It is the simplicity with which they describe it. To the ancient storytellers, these abilities were not seen as miracles. They were seen as ordinary, natural, the way the world functioned before memory reset itself. And in the heart of Ka-Ora lived the beings known as the Children of Light. The stories claim they walked alongside humans but were not human. They appeared mortal in body but not in lifespan. They lived for centuries, and their deaths were described not as endings but as transitions. Their bodies were said to age, yet their consciousness remained intact. When one life ended, another began, without losing memories of earlier cycles. This concept is almost impossible to place within our understanding of biology, yet the stories insist on it. They insist that the children of light carried the continuity of a world that had risen and fallen many times. They describe them as guardians, but not in a mystical sense. They guarded the structure of knowledge itself. Among them was one whose presence is mentioned in record after record, a figure whose role seemed to shape the destiny of Atlantis. A teacher described as patient and watchful, who carried both the wisdom of the children and the empathy of humans. His name was Ptolemy, though it appears in many forms across regions and eras. Ptolemy was a keeper of the Great Temple, a structure said to be older than Atlantis itself. Within its halls, the children of light gathered to study a source of energy they called the eternal fire. Modern readers often imagine this eternal fire as symbolic, but the original texts do not treat it that way. They describe it as a real phenomenon, a kind of radiant presence, neither flame nor light, that responded to consciousness. According to the myth, the eternal fire granted the children their longevity. It also granted them a responsibility to maintain balance, to guide the cycles, to intervene only when the world drifted too far from its intended path. Ptolemy trained many pupils in this discipline, but one pupil surpassed all the others. A young being born in Ka-Ora with a mind sharper than his teachers expected. A pupil who questioned everything, including the reasons the children did not interfere more directly with the lives of humans. His name was Thoth. He grew quickly in knowledge and in awareness. He understood the eternal fire not as energy, but as a state of mind. He learned the cycles of the universe not just through study, but through a kind of perception impossible for humans today. He began to sense when a cycle approached its end, and long before the destruction of Atlantis, he felt something shifting beneath the world, a pressure building slowly, like breath held too long. Atlantis at that time was not at war. It was thriving. Its cities glowed at night. Its archives were full. Its ships travelled to lands across the oceans. Yet within its quiet prosperity, a small group of teachers began to speak of an approaching event. They did not know its shape, only that it would be sudden, overwhelming, and irreversible. Some called it a flood. Some called it a winter of eternal darkness. Some called it a cleansing. But whatever its nature, they agreed on one thing. Atlantis would not survive it. This is where the story grows unsettling. If Atlantis truly possessed the knowledge described in the myths, why did it not prevent its own destruction? Why did its great teachers and its children of light simply wait for the end? One explanation appears in a fragment of an ancient text preserved in a monastery far from Atlantis. It states that no cycle can be stopped once set in motion. The world resets itself to preserve its own balance. No civilization can escape this rule, not even the highest. Thoth seems to have understood this. Instead of trying to save Atlantis, he prepared to save something more important, the memory of its knowledge. But here is where the legends diverge. Some say he carried a single tablet. Others say he carried many. Others say he carried nothing at all, only a pattern in his mind that would be written later. Whatever the truth, every version agrees that Thoth left before the final day. He left with a small group of teachers, guided by a perception only the children possessed. Atlantis did not fall gradually. It fell in a single moment. The sea rose, the sky darkened, the islands cracked, and the 10 kingdoms of light were swallowed by water. But Thoth did not look back. His mission was not to mourn the past, but to plant its memory into the soil of the next age. Where he went and what he carried with him becomes the foundation of the next chapter. Because the story of Atlantis does not end with its destruction. It ends when Thoth steps ashore in a land that will one day be called Egypt. When the waters finally calmed, when the last lights of Atlantis slipped beneath the waves, There were no witnesses left to speak of it. No human tongue recorded the fall. No surviving structure kept the memory. Yet something from that age remained. Not a place, not a ruin, a presence. Thoth. He did not rise from the ocean as a survivor. He did not cling to wreckage or drift to safety. The legends describe his departure from Atlantis as deliberate, as though he had already stepped into the next chapter before the previous one ended. For him, the destruction of a civilization was not an end. It was a transition in a cycle he had studied for lifetimes. How many lifetimes is unknown. Ancient writings disagree on the number. Some say Thoth had lived through 6 cycles of humanity. Some say he had lived through 12. Others insist he was born at the midpoint between ages and therefore belonged to none of them. But all sources speak of one truth. Thoth carried memory across boundaries that erase every other trace of the past. His nature has always raised questions. Was he human in the way we understand the word? Was he a being elevated by knowledge? Or did he belong to a species that did not age as humans do? The stories never answer this directly. Instead, they describe traits that feel out of place in human history. They say his mind did not forget. They say his body aged only when he allowed it to. They say he could leave one form and return in another without losing himself. These descriptions echo the abilities of the children of light, suggesting Thoth was one of them, or perhaps something more. Yet even among the children, he was different. He possessed not just longevity, but intention. He carried a purpose that outlived Atlantis, and that purpose was knowledge. The legends describe him walking for days along the new shorelines of a world reshaped by the flood. They describe him traveling with a small band of teachers, each chosen for their mastery of a specific discipline. One understood the laws of the stars. Another understood the cycles of Earth. Another held the memory of lost sciences. And together they carried the last fragments of Atlantean learning. But Thoth carried something they did not, something the stories never describe clearly but refuse to ignore. In some texts, it is called a tablet, in others, a plate. In others, a stone that seemed alive under his hands. Whether these were translations of a single object or attempts to name something beyond human vocabulary is unclear. What matters is that every tradition agrees the object contained the blueprint of creation. This is the first time the Emerald Tablet enters the story, not as a relic crafted in a workshop, but as an inheritance from a civilization that measured reality differently from us. Some say Thoth carved it himself before the fall. Others say he uncovered it in the Great Temple. Others insist he received it from a being older than Atlantis. But the legends are united in this. The tablet was not a tool. It was an extension of knowledge, shaped into a form that could survive the death of a world. As Thoth travelled, he did not hide this tablet from his companions, but neither did he allow them to study it fully. It is said that only those who understood the rhythm of cycles could comprehend its meaning. To everyone else, the symbols appeared to change. Words rearranged themselves. Lines shifted position. The tablet did not offer knowledge freely. It reflected the mind of the one who held it. Some traditions speak of a test. They say that if the holder approached with fear, the tablet became unreadable. If they approached with pride, it grew heavy and dim. Only when approached with balance did the green surface clarify and reveal fragments of its message. This idea of conditional knowledge appears repeatedly in writings attributed to early mystery schools. It suggests that the Emerald Tablet was not merely a document, but a threshold. As Thoth journeyed outward from the ruins of his world, he followed a direction not chosen by chance. He moved toward a region the Atlanteans once called Kem, a place marked in their star maps as a future center of rebirth. In those days, Kem was a raw land, a place of desert winds and scattered tribes. But it held something Atlantis knew would matter in the next age, something not yet awakened. The journey from the shores of the vanished continent to Kem was long, and the legends do not describe it in detail. Instead, they describe moments. Nights when the stars aligned in unfamiliar patterns, as if signaling a new beginning. Days when the group walked through landscapes freshly carved by the flood. Valleys still wet with the memory of catastrophe. Mountains reshaped, rivers diverted, a world in recovery. At times Thoth would stop and touch the ground. His companions watched in silence as if understanding something was being exchanged, though none could explain what. In some accounts, the earth responded with a faint vibration. In others, the air grew still around him. These details are too consistent to dismiss as embellishment. They hint that Thoth interacted with the world in ways beyond natural explanation. Yet despite his abilities, there is one detail the legends repeat with unusual emphasis. Thoth showed grief, not often, but enough for those around him to notice. Some texts say he spoke to the sea as though addressing a lost friend. Others say he paused at night and looked back toward the place where Atlantis had been, even though nothing remained above the water. The stories do not describe him as a detached being beyond emotion. They describe him as one who understood the weight of endings. This humanity, if it can be called that, is what sets his story apart. He is not depicted as a distant figure of myth. He is depicted as a survivor with a responsibility larger than loss. And that responsibility guided him relentlessly toward Kem. When at last he reached the region, the legends shift in tone. They speak of the land reacting as if recognizing him. Some say the desert winds calmed the moment he stepped across the boundary of the valley. Others say the stars brightened. Others say the tribes who lived there felt an unexplainable stirring, as though an old memory had been touched. Thoth had arrived, and the next phase of his mission was about to begin. But the story of why he chose Kem, and how the Emerald Tablet shaped the first civilization to rise after the flood, belongs to the next chapter. There are moments in Earth's history when time seems to break. Moments when the world resets itself with a force so absolute that everything before it becomes myth, and everything after it begins from silence. The end of Atlantis was one of those moments. The seas did not rise slowly. They surged. Ice fields that had stood for thousands of years collapsed in a single season. Rivers reversed direction. Islands disintegrated beneath walls of water that carried forests, cities, and entire coastlines with them. The sky dimmed from dust and vapor. The temperature plunged. In less than a human lifetime, the age of Atlantis ended. To the survivors scattered across distant lands, the disaster appeared random. A punishment from the heavens, a natural event beyond reason. But to the children of light and to Thoth, the deluge was neither random nor unexpected. It was the closing of a cycle they had studied since long before humans first shaped stone into tools. The children taught that the earth moved through phases, each phase governed by forces that stretched far beyond the planet. When these forces aligned in harmony, civilizations rose. When they fell out of balance, civilizations collapsed. Floods were not seen as punishment. They were seen as the resetting of a rhythm that had been interrupted. Atlantis, for all its brilliance, had reached the edge of a cycle. And once the cycle turns, even the most advanced cultures cannot stop it. This belief shaped what happened in the final days before the fall. Instead of building fortresses or seeking safety, the children of light prepared something else. They prepared the teachers of the dawn. These teachers were chosen not for their strength, but for their memory. Each one carried a discipline essential for rebuilding a world. One held the knowledge of architecture, the ability to align structures with the stars. One held the knowledge of medicine, using methods that would seem like sorcery in later ages. One understood metallurgy, working with materials humans no longer know how to create. One understood the mathematics of cycles, the rhythms that determined when an age would rise or fall. The last teacher was Thoth. His task was different. He did not carry a single discipline. He carried the pattern that connected them. the blueprint of the world before the flood, the memory of how a civilization could rise from nothing and reach a brilliance unmatched in the ages that followed. Some legends say the teachers of the dawn left Atlantis before the first tremors. Others say they departed on the day the seas opened. Others say the sea swallowed their departure and that only Thoth's guidance allowed them to navigate the chaos. No version can be proven, but they all share a detail that feels important. The teachers did not travel together. Each one was sent in a different direction. One toward the west, where mountains would rise again. One toward the north, where ice would someday recede. One toward the south, where jungles would grow over ancient plains. And Thoth toward the east, toward the land that the Atlanteans had long marked as a seed for the next age. As Thoth approached the region of Kem, the world behind him was still breaking apart. Entire ecosystems were shifting. Animals migrated to survive. Human tribes were forced to abandon their ancestral homes. The earth was reorganizing itself. It would take thousands of years for stability to return, but in the midst of destruction, something else occurred. Memory scattered. Languages disappeared. Technologies vanished. Stories that once filled libraries were reduced to fragments passed through speech. Humanity forgot the world that existed before the deluge, not because it chose to forget, but because memory itself was swept away with the lands that held it. Only the teachers carried intact knowledge forward. This is why ancient cultures across continents describe a mysterious presence arriving after the flood. A presence that teaches astronomy, writing, agriculture, and governance. A presence that appears suddenly and leaves once its work is complete. In some regions, this presence is a man. In others, a god. In others, a being with no clear form. But the role is always the same. A bringer of knowledge from a world that no longer exists. Thoth is only the most detailed of these figures, but he is also the one most consistently connected to a specific object, the tablet he carried. Some sources claim the emerald tablet was crafted on Atlantis as a kind of key, encoding the laws of transformation. Others say it was much older, created in an age long before Atlantis existed. Others believe the tablet was not created at all, but discovered in the depths of the Great Temple, a remnant from an even earlier cycle. The stories cannot agree on its origins, but they all insist it played a role in the teacher's mission. The tablet was said to contain instructions not for building a society, but for awakening one. It held the principles through which consciousness could rise and align with the structure of the universe. And if humanity was to rebuild after the flood, such knowledge would be essential. Yet the tablet was not simply a tool. It was dangerous in the wrong hands. Misunderstood, its messages could fracture societies instead of elevating them. For this reason, the children of light believed its wisdom must be given gradually, across many generations, only when humans were ready. This is why Thoth did not reveal the emerald tablet immediately upon reaching Kem. Knowledge delivered too early can destroy as easily as it can uplift. But another detail emerges from the legends. The tablet was not merely protected, it was hidden. Hidden not in darkness, but in plain sight. Hidden in symbols and structures that ordinary eyes could not decode. Hidden in myths that would seem like allegories until the world reached the next turning of the cycle. This idea has fascinated scholars for centuries. If the emerald tablet was truly hidden, then the question becomes unavoidable. Where? Some say it was buried beneath the sands long before the pyramids were built. Others say it was placed inside a chamber of the pyramids after their completion. Others suggest it wasn't a physical tablet at all, but a concept encoded into architecture, language, or ritual. Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. Thoth did not simply carry knowledge out of Atlantis. He carried the responsibility to protect it, and that responsibility guided every step he took in the land of Kem. But to understand what he found there, and how a scattered desert people became the heirs of an ancient world, we must step into the moment Thoth arrived on their shores. When Thoth crossed into the land the Atlanteans had long called Chem, he entered a world still trembling from the memory of the flood. Rivers carved new paths across the earth. Deserts stretched into plains that had once been forests. Small tribes moved restlessly from place to place, searching for food, for shelter, for meaning. To them the world had ended. To Thoth it had only shifted its form. The legends describe the moment of his arrival with an unusual quiet. There was no miracle, no fire in the sky, no announcement. Thoth did not descend from the heavens. He walked, step by step, across sand that still held the warmth of the collapsing age. Yet something in the air changed when he entered the valley. The winds slowed, the horizon shimmered. The people of Chem felt a presence before they saw it. Their stories do not agree on what he looked like. Some say he appeared as a tall man with eyes that reflected the moon. Others describe him with the head of an ibis, a symbolic portrayal that scholars later misinterpreted as literal. Others say he appeared as a traveller with nothing more than a staff and a tablet veiled in cloth. But all descriptions share one trait. When he spoke, the people listened. It was not authority that drew them, it was recognition. A strange sense that they had known him once, in a time no one living could remember. Thoth did not reveal who he was or what he carried. Instead, he watched. He observed the rhythms of Chem, the movement of its rivers, the instinctive alignments of its early settlements. Even in their simplicity, the people of the region displayed an unconscious memory of something older. They built their shelters facing specific stars. They buried their dead with objects placed in patterns resembling constellations. They spoke of sky gods and boat travellers who once crossed the heavens. None of these traditions were fully formed. They were fragments, worn thin by the deluge, but still present. To Thoth, they were seeds. He chose not to approach the tribes as a ruler or a saviour. Instead, he became a teacher. He began with the simplest forms of knowledge: how to track the cycles of the moon, how to measure the movement of shadows to tell time, how to align stones with the rising of certain stars. These lessons did not seem extraordinary to the people of Chem, yet their effects were profound. Their scattered rituals began to take shape. Their calendars became more precise. Their settlements grew around fixed points of astronomical significance. It was as though Thoth was awakening something they already possessed. And then something unexpected happened. The people began to ask questions, not about the world they lived in, but about the world before it. How old was the earth? How many civilizations had existed? What force had destroyed them? Why cycles rise and fall? These were not questions of survival. They were questions of memory. Thoth answered only what the age could bear. He spoke of cycles, but not of Atlantis by name. He spoke of destruction, but not of the eternal fire. He spoke of knowledge, but not yet of the tablet he carried. This restraint is echoed in the earliest Egyptian texts, which refer to a time of the first occasion, a period when gods walked among humans, teaching but withholding the deeper laws. Over time, Thoth gathered a circle of students. These students were not chosen for power or lineage. They were chosen for their ability to remember. They learned to read the stars as a language. They learned to build structures aligned with celestial markers. They learned the geometry that would one day become the foundation of pyramids. And they learned something else, something difficult to describe. They learned to listen to silence. Thoth taught them that knowledge was not always written or spoken. Some truths were held in the spaces between words, in the alignments of stones, in the rising of a star at a specific moment in time. These teachings would later form the basis of the mystery schools of Egypt, institutions that trained generations of priests, astronomers, architects, and philosophers. But through all of this, Thoth kept the tablet hidden, not buried, not locked away, hidden in meaning, He wove its principles into the lessons he taught, into the angles of structures, into the proportions of statues, into the language itself. He knew the tablet was too powerful to reveal directly. Its knowledge could elevate humanity or break it, and yet fragments of its presence began to appear. Students described seeing a green light inside Thoth's dwelling at night. Travelers spoke of symbols that shifted like reflections on water. One legend tells of a night when the valley glowed faintly, as though touched by the breath of a forgotten sun. These details do not appear in official histories, but they persist in oral traditions, suggesting that the Emerald Tablet was not completely inert. It was responding to a world beginning to awaken. The tribes of Kem grew into villages. The villages grew into centers of ritual. Stone markers were erected. Temples began to rise. And with each structure, a pattern emerged, a pattern that did not come from the people, but from Thoth. A geometry of balance, a harmony of proportions, a silent language of creation encoded into the land itself. Later generations would call these structures sacred. They would call them divine. They would attribute them to gods. But their origins were far older than religion. They were instructions from a teacher who understood that the best way to preserve knowledge through ages of darkness was to build it into the world. Still, the Emerald Tablet remained unseen, and Thoth revealed nothing about its future. He knew his time in this form was limited. The cycle of reincarnation was not just a gift, it was a task. When one phase of his mission was complete, he would step into another life, leaving behind students who would continue the work. Before that moment came, Thoth planted a final idea in the minds of his disciples. A prophecy. He told them that one day, when the world reached another turning point, the tablet would reappear. Not to the powerful, not to the wealthy, but to those who could hear the echo of forgotten ages. The disciples did not understand what this meant. Not then, not truly, but they would spend the rest of their lives preparing for it. And the story of how the Emerald Tablet travelled beyond Egypt begins with a journey into Greece, where Thoth would become known by another name and where the ancient knowledge would take on a new form. Centuries passed in Kem. Empires rose, crumbled, and rose again. Generations of priests studied the stars from temples built with proportions they could not fully explain. The rhythms of Egypt settled into place, as though the land itself remembered the presence that had once walked among them. But Thoth did not remain. His form changed. His name changed. The cycles continued. Across the Mediterranean, in a land that would later become the heart of Western philosophy, stories began to circulate of a figure who appeared suddenly, bringing with him a knowledge that seemed impossible for any single person to possess. He was not called Thoth here. He was given a new name, one shaped by the language and culture of the region. Hermes. Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes, the thrice great. The one who had mastered the threefold knowledge. No one knows when the Greeks first heard the name. Some say merchants carried tales from Egypt. Others claim priests travelling from Kem shared stories of a divine teacher. But the earliest references make something clear. Hermes was not viewed as a mere man. He was the embodiment of wisdom itself. What is curious is how closely the descriptions of Hermes match the descriptions of Thoth. Both were teachers. Both were associated with writing, astronomy, and the movement of the heavens. Both guided civilizations toward higher knowledge, and both were said to hold a text that revealed the structure of the universe. The Greeks believed this text came from Hermes directly. They called it the Hermetica. Some parts were philosophical, others were practical. Others hinted at knowledge that seemed to lie somewhere between science and mysticism. But within these writings was a sentence that would ripple through history. As above, so below. These 4 words appeared simple, yet their implications were enormous. They suggested the universe was a mirror, that the smallest patterns reflected the largest ones, that the human mind echoed cosmic structure, that creation itself followed an intelligible order. For scholars, this phrase became a foundation. For mystics, a mantra. For alchemists, a formula. But for those who trace the origins of the idea, a question arose. How could such a principle appear in Egypt and Greece with identical meaning, despite differences in language and culture? Unless the idea came from a source older than both. This is where the emerald tablet reappears. Greek accounts describe it as a green stone carved with symbols that seem to rearrange themselves under different lighting. They say Hermes translated its contents into words, though he warned the translation could never capture the fullness of the original. They say the tablet was discovered in a cave beneath a statue. Others say it was given directly to Hermes by beings described only as the Shining Ones. But all traditions share two details. First, that the tablet contained knowledge of transformation. Second, that the tablet did not originate in Greece. What is fascinating is how the stories conflict yet agree. Some claim the tablet came from Egypt, carried by priests fleeing political unrest. Others say it came from the east, from lands swallowed by a great flood. Others claim Hermes found it during a period of wandering, guided by dreams of a world that no longer existed. None of these accounts can be proven, but all of them point to a single truth. The Greeks did not create the emerald tablet. They inherited it. Hermes Trismegistus is often portrayed as a synthesis of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. But this explanation does not satisfy the oldest sources. These sources describe Hermes not as a merging of traditions, but as a returning figure. A teacher reappearing under a new identity, continuing work begun in another age. Whether these descriptions are literal or symbolic, they reveal a striking pattern. Every culture that encountered the emerald tablet connected it to a being whose origins were beyond human memory. As the Hermetic tradition grew, so did its influence. It migrated to Alexandria, where Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and early Christian scholars gathered. The city became a crucible of ideas, a place where ancient knowledge resurfaced in unexpected forms. In the archives of this great library, copies of the Hermetica were preserved alongside texts on astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. But something else occurred in this era. A shift in how knowledge was perceived. For the first time, seekers began to treat wisdom as a path, a discipline that could transform not just intellect but existence itself. They believed the universe was not static, it was dynamic, alive. And if a person could understand its patterns, they could align themselves with forces that shaped reality. This belief echoes directly from the emerald tablet, not metaphor, not superstition. A framework for understanding creation. Hermetic practitioners recorded visions, experiments, and meditations. Some claimed the tablet contained instructions for contacting higher intelligences. Others believed it explained how consciousness could outlast the body. Some saw it as a guide for building temples aligned with celestial structures. And then, without warning, the original tablet vanished. There is no consensus on where it went. Some say it burned with the Library of Alexandria. Others believe priests smuggled it into the desert. Others think it was taken to a hidden archive beneath the foundations of early Christian temples. A few fringe accounts claim a group of astronomer priests carried it across the Mediterranean before disappearing from history entirely. But the disappearance is not the strange part. The strange part is what happened next. Copies of the Emerald Tablet's words began to appear in places that should not have had access to one another, in Arabic texts thousands of miles away, in medieval manuscripts, in secret orders that emerged during the Renaissance. The message persisted even when the object did not. As above, so below. As within, so without. It was as though the tablet wanted to survive. And perhaps it did. Knowledge that is meant for more than one age will always find a way to return, even when the artifact that carries it is lost. But the story of what happened when this knowledge reached the Middle Ages, and how the search for the tablet transformed into a desperate quest for power, by the time the Middle Ages arrived, the world's memory of Atlantis had faded into fragments scattered through myth, scripture, and rumour. Thoth had long since vanished into the cycle of rebirth. Hermes Trismegistus had become a legendary figure woven into philosophy, religion, and magic. And yet one thing remained constant: the words of the Emerald Tablet. They reappeared in manuscripts copied by monks who did not understand them. They appeared in Arabic treatises carried through Spain into Europe. They appeared in whispered teachings among scholars who believed the universe was far stranger than the church allowed. Each time the message resurfaced, it carried the same signature, the same structure, the same rhythm. As above, so below. As within, so without. To the thinkers of that era, these words were not poetic. They were instructions, a coded description of a universe where matter and consciousness were reflections of one another. A universe where transformation was not only possible, but natural. This idea ignited a new kind of seeker, the alchemist. The popular image of an alchemist is a solitary figure hunched over a furnace, attempting to turn lead into gold. But the earliest alchemists were something different. They were part philosophers, part scientists, part mystics. They believed the physical world was a veil over deeper truths, and they believed the Emerald Tablet held the key to lifting that veil. The goal of alchemy was not wealth, it was awakening. At the heart of their work was a mystery they called the Great Work, the creation of a substance capable of perfect transformation, a substance that could purify any metal, heal any illness, and perhaps extend life itself. They called it the Philosopher's Stone. To most people, the stone is legend, but to the alchemists, it was a blueprint taken directly from the Emerald Tablet. The stone was not valued for what it could do, but for what it represented. It was the embodiment of the tablet's message, a physical symbol of the unity between the above and the below. One of the earliest and most serious seekers was a man history remembers for something entirely different: Isaac Newton. Newton is praised for his laws of motion, his work on gravity, and his advances in mathematics, but he devoted more of his life to alchemy than to physics. In secret, by candlelight, he translated manuscripts, compared symbols, and pursued the hidden knowledge he believed had survived from the age before the flood. Among his private papers was a handwritten copy of the Emerald Tablet. What drew him to it was not superstition, it was structure. Newton recognized that the tablet's language, though symbolic, hinted at laws that governed both the material world and the unseen one. He believed the universe was held together by invisible forces. While he discovered some of them, others remained beyond reach. Newton was not alone. Across Europe, alchemists gathered in secret societies and hidden laboratories. They shared coded letters, obscure diagrams, and cryptic formulas. But beneath the symbols was a common belief. They were not inventing anything. They were recovering something, a knowledge lost in the flood. As the Renaissance blossomed, these secret orders grew more organized. Groups such as the Rosicrucians and later the Freemasons wove hermetic principles into their teachings. They believed the Emerald Tablet had once belonged to a lineage of teachers stretching back to Thoth himself. They believed their work continued that lineage. Not all who sought the tablet's wisdom were cautious. Some wanted power. European courts began to hear rumors of men who could create gold, cure diseases, or foresee events. Kings and emperors funded laboratories. Some sought the stone for immortality. Others sought it to dominate nations. Yet each attempt followed the same pattern. Brilliant minds devoted their lives to the great work, only to vanish into obscurity, madness, or poverty. But among them were a few who left unsettling clues. There are records of an alchemist known as Sendivogius, who wrote of a green fire that appeared when certain materials were combined. He claimed the phenomenon was not chemical, but spiritual. Another alchemist described a substance that glowed without heat, reacting to the presence of consciousness. Yet another spoke of a mirror-like stone that reflected symbols no one had carved. These accounts sound impossible. They may be exaggerations, or they may be echoes of the same phenomenon that surrounded the emerald tablet in earlier ages. A knowledge that interacts with the observer. The deeper the alchemist dug, the stranger the evidence became. They began to describe visions during their experiments, voices, shifting symbols, a sense that the knowledge they pursued was watching them, responding to their progress. These experiences were dismissed as hysteria or alchemical metaphor, but the consistency across regions and generations is difficult to ignore. Then came the turning point. The more the obsession grew, the more dangerous the pursuit became. Manuscripts were confiscated, scholars were imprisoned, religious authorities condemned Hermetic teachings as heresy. The Emerald Tablet itself, once studied openly, was now copied in secrecy. It was during this period that the most troubling idea emerged, that the original tablet was not lost, it was hidden by those who believed humanity was not ready, hidden by those who feared it would be misused, hidden by those who understood that the tablet's instructions, if interpreted literally, could alter the fabric of society. Theories multiplied. Some said the tablet was taken by Templar knights. Others whispered that it had been sealed beneath the Vatican. Others believed a brotherhood of astronomers had smuggled it into the mountains. A few suggested that the tablet was not kept anywhere because it no longer existed as a physical object, that its knowledge had dissolved into minds, into symbols, into architecture. Regardless of what was true, one fact became clear. The alchemists were trying to force open a door that earlier ages had approached with caution, and the door did not open, at least not then. But something else happened instead. Manuscripts appeared that claimed to decode the tablet's message, texts that promised to reveal the true great work without metaphor, texts that would one day inspire a modern attempt unlike any before it. By the time the world stepped into the 20th century, alchemy had been dismissed as superstition. Universities no longer taught it. Scientists treated it as an embarrassment from an age before rational thought. The Emerald Tablet was mentioned only in footnotes, a symbol of an old mystical tradition that modern society believed it had outgrown. But something curious happened. The more humanity distanced itself from the ancient world, the more fragments of forgotten knowledge began to surface. Strange materials discovered deep in archaeological sites, ancient symbols appearing in locations thousands of miles apart, structures whose geometry matched celestial alignments with impossible precision. It was as though pieces of a pattern were rising into view, whether humanity wanted them or not. And then, in the year 2011, the silence broke. Without warning, without announcement, a digital manuscript appeared on an obscure online forum. No author, no publisher, no provenance, no explanation. It called itself the Book of Aquarius. At first glance, it looked unremarkable. A simple PDF file, 165 pages, no graphics, no flourish. But the opening sentence stopped readers cold. The age of secrets is over. This was not a poetic introduction, it was a declaration. The book stated openly what alchemists for centuries had only hinted at, that the truths of the Emerald Tablet had been hidden intentionally, that past philosophers had masked their teachings in symbols to prevent misuse, that allegory had been used not to enlighten, but to obscure. And now, the book claimed, the veil would be lifted. The Book of Aquarius did something no other alchemical manuscript had ever dared to do. It rejected metaphor entirely. It insisted that the Emerald Tablet's teachings were literal, that the great work was not symbolic, that the Philosopher's Stone was not a spiritual metaphor. It even went further. It claimed to provide the complete method for creating the stone. No riddle, no code, no allegory, step by step, direct, unhidden. At first, this made readers laugh. Modern minds were not ready to believe that a document claiming to unlock the most guarded secret of antiquity could simply appear in the public domain. Yet the laughter faded as scholars examined the references. The book cited dozens of classical alchemical texts, many of them obscure and difficult to obtain. It dissected their symbols with precision. It compared translations line by line. It showed a level of comprehension that would have required not only years of study, but a direct lineage to earlier teachings. If it was a hoax, it was an exceptionally sophisticated one. But the strangest part was not the scholarship. It was the recipe. According to the Book of Aquarius, the Philosopher's Stone can be made from one ingredient, not gold, not mercury, not rare minerals. Something far more ordinary, something every human produces naturally. The reaction to this claim was immediate disbelief. Forums filled with mockery. Some readers dismissed the entire work as parody, yet others were intrigued. Throughout the history of alchemy, strange references to this single substance had appeared repeatedly, though always cloaked in metaphor. And ancient medical traditions had long considered this substance to carry the strongest essence of life. If the Book of Aquarius was to be believed, the secret the alchemists had been hiding was not complexity. It was simplicity. Still, what disturbed researchers most was not the ingredient. It was the process. The method described was long, arduous, and required complete devotion. Years of distillation, cycles of heating and cooling, a slow, deliberate purification of the essence until something new began to form. A material that glowed faintly, a material that seemed to react to consciousness, a material that resembled descriptions from earlier centuries, something that sounded very much like the stone. For the first time in history, people attempted the great work not in secret laboratories, but in kitchens, basements, sheds and garages. They followed the steps. They shared their progress. They posted photographs. They discussed failures and adjustments. A new community of modern alchemists emerged almost overnight. The author of the Book of Aquarius, still anonymous, joined these conversations. He clarified chemicals, corrected misunderstandings, explained principles. The tone was calm, assured, almost as though he had done the great work himself. When asked where he had learned this knowledge, he gave no answer. Over months the community grew. The early attempts failed. Later attempts showed glimpses of progress. Strange residues began to appear in glass vessels, substances that changed colour under sunlight, crystals that behaved in ways chemistry could not explain. Some experimenters reported dreams. Some reported heightened intuition. Some reported nothing at all. But one thing remained constant. No one could fully disprove the method, and then without warning, everything stopped. The website that hosted the Book of Aquarius went offline. The forum vanished. The discussions disappeared. Even archives that had mirrored the pages were erased. It was as if the entire project had never existed. No explanation was given. The anonymous author never resurfaced. People speculated. Some said the author removed the material voluntarily. Others claimed governments intervened. Others believed a private organization had purchased the rights. The most ambitious theory suggested that someone succeeded, that the stone was created, and that silence was the only reasonable response. But in the absence of answers, a deeper question began to surface. Why did the message reappear at that time? Why that year? Why that moment in history? Why another attempt to reveal knowledge that ancient civilizations had guarded so carefully? The Book of Aquarius was not an isolated event. It was part of a pattern stretching back through Egypt, Greece, the Middle Ages, and the flood before them, A pattern that suggests the knowledge hidden in the emerald tablet does not disappear randomly. It returns when a cycle of the world approaches a turning point. If the emerald tablet truly carried knowledge from an age before memory, then traces of that knowledge should have survived. Not as intact artifacts, not as complete texts, but as fragments scattered through time. Pieces that slipped through the collapse of civilizations. Pieces that archaeology could not explain. Pieces that science noticed, then quietly avoided. And that is exactly what we find. Long before the Book of Aquarius appeared, long before modern alchemists attempted the great work, strange discoveries surfaced across the world. Discoveries that did not fit comfortably within recorded history, yet refused to disappear. One of the earliest came from the 17th century. A German alchemist named Hennig Brand set out to create the Philosopher's Stone. He spent years collecting a substance that ancient texts hinted was essential. He boiled it, distilled it, evaporated it, purified it. He reduced hundreds of gallons into a thick black material that he heated and reheated until it burst into a glow brighter than flame. What he found was phosphorus. To modern chemistry, phosphorus is a simple element. To Brand, it was impossible. It was a substance that glowed with no heat, no fire, no logical explanation. It looked alive. It resembled descriptions in alchemical texts of a material that responded to the essence of the practitioner. Brand believed he had taken the first step toward the stone. He had not. But he had uncovered something older, something that echoed the ancient belief that transformation is not only metaphorical, but physical. More discoveries followed over the centuries, though most were buried in academic journals with little publicity. Materials that glowed faintly in sealed chambers, metals that behaved differently when handled by specific people, stones that emitted unusual electromagnetic patterns, artifacts carved with symbols resembling those described in Hermetic manuscripts. The pattern grew more unsettling when researchers realized that some of these artifacts were found in places separated by continents and millennia, yet shared geometric similarities. Triangles nested within circles, proportions that matched the golden ratio, alignments with star systems that ancient people should have had no knowledge of. These were not coincidences. They were signatures, and they raised a disturbing question. Were ancient civilizations rediscovering something on their own, or were they remembering something they had once been taught? Excavations in Egypt added more weight to the mystery. Beneath the sands around Saqqara, archaeologists found blocks of stone polished to a smoothness difficult to achieve even with modern tools. In Abydos, they discovered carvings so precise that some researchers suggested a technology older than Egypt itself. In the Osirian, they found structures made of granite blocks arranged in patterns that matched star alignments used in Hermetic diagrams. None of these findings proved the existence of the Emerald Tablet, but they revealed a troubling reality. Parts of Egypt's oldest structures contain knowledge that should not have existed in the period they were built. Some scholars dismissed these anomalies as artistic flourishes. Others argued for reinterpretation of historical timelines. But a small number recognized something else. These patterns resembled the fragments of geometry embedded within the tablets, translated words. They were not random. They were instructions. This raises a possibility that few academics are willing to consider. What if the Emerald Tablet was never meant to be preserved as a document? What if it was meant to be preserved as a pattern across landscapes? A blueprint encoded into architecture, myth, ritual, and symbolism. A blueprint that could survive floods, fires, and the collapse of civilizations because it did not rely on a single object. It relied on the world itself. Consider the pyramidion stones that once capped the ancient pyramids, carved from materials that reflected light in specific wavelengths. Consider the Dendera light reliefs and their strange resemblance to electrical diagrams. Consider the Nabta Playa stone circle aligned with Orion long before Stonehenge was built. consider the unexplained resonance found inside the King's Chamber at Giza. Each anomaly by itself is interesting. Together they echo a message so old that no culture remembers its origin. As above, so below. As within, so without. It is as if the earth holds a memory older than humanity, and we are only now learning to read it. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence of a lost knowledge comes not from stone, but from the human mind. Across cultures that had no contact with one another, ancient traditions describe a glowing essence within the body. Hindus called it ojas. Taoists called it jing. Alchemists called it the first matter. All believed this essence could be purified, refined, and transformed into something luminous, something that granted clarity, vitality, and longevity. These ideas parallel the process described in both medieval alchemy and the Book of Aquarius. Different languages, different metaphors, same structure. Why? Unless all these traditions inherited their understanding from a common ancestor, a civilization erased from the surface of the earth, but not from its deeper memory. If that civilization encoded their knowledge into a single tablet, and then encoded it again into symbols, geometry, and ritual, then the fragments we find today are not random anomalies. They are pieces of a pattern designed to survive the fall of worlds. This leads to the most difficult question. If these traces exist, if this ancient knowledge was preserved intentionally, then where is the rest of it? Where is the complete system? Where is the unbroken lineage? Where is the original tablet? Some believe it still exists, hidden under sand, sealed in stone, locked in archives not open to the public. Others believe the tablet dissolved or disintegrated when its purpose was fulfilled. Others believe it was never physical to begin with, that it was a crystallized idea, a resonance left behind by beings who understood the universe differently. Whatever the truth, one fact remains. Humanity is approaching another turning point. Technology accelerates faster than understanding. Old systems collapse while new ones appear without warning. Massive changes unfold in the environment, in the climate, in the structure of societies. Patterns repeat themselves, echoing cycles described in myths older than writing. And in moments like these, the ancient stories say one thing consistently. When an age is about to change, certain memories return. Some through discovery, some through intuition, some through fragments scattered across the world, and some through a tablet that appears only when the world is ready. What that readiness means, and what the tablet might reveal in our era, belongs to the final part. There are moments in human history when the world seems to hesitate. Moments when the familiar patterns of life begin to loosen, when structures that once felt permanent start to tremble, and when something quiet but unmistakable stirs beneath the surface of ordinary days. To most people, these changes feel like coincidence. To ancient civilizations, they signaled the turning of an age. The teachings attributed to Thoth and Hermes spoke of cycles measured not in centuries, but in thousands of years. Each cycle rose with a burst of discovery, declined into confusion, and ended with a cleansing that forced humanity to begin again. These teachings were never meant to frighten, they were meant to prepare. They suggested that civilizations do not die, they transform, and every transformation begins with a rediscovery of something forgotten. If this is true, then our era is approaching a threshold. Humanity today stands between worlds, one foot in a past built on old assumptions, the other stepping into a future that has not yet learned its shape. For the first time since the ancient flood, humans have the ability to alter the planet itself. We reach into the smallest particles and the largest stars. We map genomes, simulate realities, and build machines that think. Yet the more power we gain, the less we seem to understand the nature of the consciousness that wields it. It is here that the old stories grow relevant again. They say that when a civilization begins to move faster than its wisdom, the memory of older ages returns. Not as prophecy, not as warning, as invitation. The universe offers a reminder that humanity has lived through turning points before, and that the knowledge needed to cross them has never been entirely lost. This is where the Emerald Tablet enters the story for the final time. The tablet is not simply a relic, it is a symbol of continuity, a thread connecting worlds separated by floods, by collapse, by the forgetting that follows every great ending. Whether the tablet was a physical object, a crystalline device, or a set of principles hidden across cultures, its purpose remains the same: to carry the essence of the first knowledge from one age to the next. Look closely at its message: as above, so below; as within, so without. These words survive because they are not instructions, they are descriptions. They describe a universe where inner and outer realities reflect each other, where consciousness shapes matter as much as matter shapes consciousness, where transformation is not an illusion but a fundamental law. This idea reappears in physics, in biology, in mathematics. It reappears in meditation traditions and in quantum experiments. It reappears in the intuition millions of people share that the world is connected by something deeper than chance. In this sense, the Emerald Tablet has already resurfaced, not as an artifact, but as a principle humanity is beginning to rediscover on its own. Yet the old stories hint at something more. They speak of an eighth civilization, not a future empire of technology and machines, but a civilization built on a different awareness, one that understands the patterns that shaped the ages before it, one that does not collapse under the weight of its own ignorance because it remembers what the previous cycles forgot, one that can integrate knowledge of the physical world with knowledge of the inner world without tearing itself apart. If this eighth civilization is truly emerging, its foundations will not be political or economic. They will be conceptual. They will be built on the rediscovery of principles that seem ancient but feel strangely modern. The unity between observer and observed. The structure of nature mirrored in the structure of thought. The idea that consciousness is not an accident but a participant in creation. These principles echo the tablet. They echo the message Thoth carried across the flood. They echo the threads that connect Egypt to Greece, Greece to the Middle Ages, and the Middle Ages to the quiet appearance of the Book of Aquarius. It does not matter whether every detail of these accounts is literal. What matters is that each age preserved the same pattern, a knowledge that returns only when the world is shifting. But if the Emerald Tablet does appear again in our time, what would it look like? Perhaps it would not be a stone at all. Perhaps it would be a set of insights emerging across disciplines that once seemed unrelated. Perhaps it would appear as a unifying principle discovered in physics, or as a breakthrough in understanding consciousness. Perhaps it would come as a document, or a discovery, or a device. Or perhaps it is already here, waiting for recognition rather than discovery. The ancient teachings never said the tablet would reveal itself. They said the world would become ready to understand it. And readiness is not measured by technology. It is measured by attention. If humanity is entering a new cycle, its greatest challenge will not be to build, but to remember. To recall that the civilizations of old did not disappear because they lacked power. They disappeared because they lacked balance. They mastered the outer world but lost the inner one. They manipulated forces without understanding their consequences. They expanded faster than they awakened. The Emerald Tablet was left behind as a safeguard, a reminder that knowledge without wisdom is a path that repeats itself endlessly. But the cycles are not traps, they are invitations. Each one offers the possibility of rising higher than the last. Each one offers humanity a chance to become something more than a civilization destined to forget itself. Each one offers a way to step into the eighth civilization with eyes open. In the end, the true secret of the Emerald Tablet may be simple. It was never about immortality of the body. It was about immortality of understanding. A message that can survive the fall of continents. A pattern that can outlive the rise and collapse of worlds. A whisper that can travel across thousands of years and still speak clearly. Not a tablet, a memory. And if you are hearing that memory now, then perhaps the old stories were right. Perhaps the knowledge of the first age does not return when the world is ready. Perhaps it returns when someone in that world is ready to receive it. If so, then the cycle has already begun. And if this journey has sparked something in you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who follows these mysteries, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter we uncover together. Your support helps keep these forgotten worlds alive, and I am grateful you walk this path with us.